Early in the Battle of the Atlantic, German U-boat commanders, with their superior underwater capabilities, often dismissed the smaller, slower Allied destroyer escorts as inconsequential threats. This arrogance was shattered as tactics and technology evolved, particularly with the introduction of advanced sonar, Escort, and Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar. These tin cans became deadly hunters, exemplified by the U.S. Navy's task group. 21.12 Hunter-Killer Group under Captain Daniel V. Gallery, which starting in 1943 systematically decimated U-boat wolf packs, turning the hunters into the hunted and decisively shifting the balance in the Atlantic. German U-boat captains mocked the humble destroyer Escort. Then these tin cans hunted them to oblivion. Section 1. The Apex of the Wolf Pack, January 17, 1942. The frigid, churning expanse of the North Atlantic, hundreds of miles east of Newfoundland. The metallic groan of the U-boat's hull resonated deep within you, 123. A rhythmic thrum against the immense pressure of the abyss. Captain Lieutenant Reinhard Hartigan, a man whose piercing blue eyes held the cold wisdom of countless patrols, ran a gloved hand over the damp steel of the periscope housing. Above, the war raged, but down here, in the silent, claustrophobic world of the Grey Wolf, it was a different kind of fight. Hartigan, known to his crew as Der Elway des Atlantics, the Lion of the Atlantic, felt the familiar hum of anticipation. For months, the American eastern seaboard had been a hunter's paradise, a soft underbelly ripe for the striking. Convoys, often unescorted, were easy prey. Their silhouettes etched against the moonlit horizon like invitations to a feast. Bearing Herr Kalian. The hydrophone operator whispered, his face illuminated by the faint red glow of his instruments. "Hold course," Hartigan murmured, his gaze fixed on the shimmering green display. He imagined the merchant ships above, lumbering beasts laden with the lifeblood of the Allied war effort. Oil, steel, munitions, food. They were slow, often poorly armed, and their protectors. The scattered destroyers and corvettes were, in his estimation, little more than nuisances. He remembered the derisive laughter in the mess halls at Lorient, the way veteran captains would scoff at the Allied escorts, calling them tin cans, easily outmaneuvered, easily sunk. Below him, the crew moved with practiced efficiency, a ballet of tension and precision. Valves hissed, gauges clicked, and the distant thrum of the electric motors was a lullaby of stealth. Hartigan thought of the early days of the war, the happy time, as they called it, when U-boats roamed with impunity, sending hundreds of thousands of tons of shipping to the bottom. Even now, America's entry into the war hadn't truly changed the fundamental equation for men like him. The vastness of the ocean, the sheer number of targets, and the still primitive anti-submarine warfare tactics of the Allies meant the wolf packs continued to reign supreme. He pictured the chaos he'd caused off the American coast, the burning tankers, the lifeboats adrift in oil slicks. It was a brutal business, but a necessary one, he believed, to starve Britain and cripple America before they could fully awaken their industrial might. Target identified, Herr Kalian, the sonar man reported, his voice low but firm. Multiple contacts. Merchant convoy escorted. Hartigan allowed himself a small, grim smile. Escorted, you say? Let us see what these little dogs can do. He moved to the attack periscope, his hands steady as he gripped the handles. The surface world was a blur of gray waves, but then, through the lens, the distinct boxy shapes of merchant vessels resolved into focus. And yes, there they were. Two lean gray shapes, destroyers, zigzagging lazily at the convoy's flanks. Young men, likely fresh out of naval academies, trying to play at war. He'd dealt with their kind before. They were fast, yes, but predictable. Their sonar was often ineffective against a skilled U-boat commander. Their depth charges a crude, imprecise weapon of desperation. He felt a surge of confidence, bordering on disdain. They might try to hunt him, but he was the true hunter here. He would strike, then vanish into the depths, leaving behind only wreckage and despair. The convoy was his. Section 2. The Whispers of a New Threat. Previous _section _text gives Hartigan allowed himself a small, grim smile. Escorted, you say. Let us see what these little dogs can do. He moved to the attack periscope, his hands steady as he gripped the handles. The surface world was a blur of gray waves, but then, through the lens, the distinct, boxy shapes of merchant vessels resolved into focus. And yes, there they were. Two lean gray shapes, destroyers, zigzagging lazily at the convoy's flanks. Young men, likely fresh out of naval academies, trying to play at war. He'd dealt with their kind before. They were fast, yes, but predictable. Their sonar was often ineffective against a skilled U-boat commander. Their depth charges a crude, imprecise weapon of desperation. He felt a surge of confidence, bordering on disdain. They might try to hunt him, but he was the true hunter here. He would strike, then vanish into the depths, leaving behind only wreckage and despair. The convoy was his. March 23, 1943. Naval Staff Headquarters, Western Approaches, Liverpool, England. The air in the war room was thick with cigarette smoke and the grim scent of defeat. Admiral Sir Max Horton, a man whose craggy face seemed carved from the very hardships of the Atlantic, stared intently at the vast wall map. Red pins, each representing a sunken Allied ship, clustered menacingly off the American coast and along the convoy routes to Britain. The losses were catastrophic. Over 1.2 million tons of shipping had gone to the bottom in January alone. Germany's U-boat arm, under Admiral Dönitz, was winning the Battle of the Atlantic, and with it, threatening to strangle Britain into submission. Another convoy scattered, sir, reported a weary staff officer, pointing to a fresh cluster of red pins. Two more tankers, a freighter carrying vital aircraft parts. Horton grunted, running a hand through his thinning hair. He knew the U-boat captains well, their audacious tactics, their relentless pursuit. He also knew their arrogance. They believed themselves untouchable in their silent, steel predators. But Horton was a fighter, a man who refused to concede. He'd seen the reports, the whispers of new technologies. New strategies emerging from the relentless intellectual crucible of wartime innovation. The convoys needed more than just escort ships. They needed hunters. What's the status on the new equipment? Horton asked, his voice a low rumble. The centimetric radar. The new sonar arrays. And the Americans? What are they proposing for those tin cans they're building? A younger officer, Lieutenant Commander Roger Davies, stepped forward, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Sir, the Type 271 centimetric radar is showing promising results. Its shorter wavelength means it's far less susceptible to environmental interference. And crucially, it's virtually undetectable by the U-boat's current passive receivers. And for the smaller escorts, the Americans are beginning to roll out specialized destroyer escorts purpose-built anti-submarine platforms. Smaller than full destroyers, but equipped with the latest sonar and depth charge projectors. They're also experimenting with a new forward-firing weapon. The Hedgehog. Horton's gaze sharpened. The Hedgehog? He'd read the preliminary reports. Instead of dropping depth charges blindly over the stern, the Hedgehog fired an array of contact-fused projectiles ahead of the ship, allowing the escort to maintain sonar contact with the submarine right up to the moment of attack. It was a paradigm shift, a brutal counter to the U-boat's evasive tactics. No longer would the attacker have to lose contact as it passed over its prey and their crews. Horton pressed, are they learning? Are they getting the training they need to hunt these wolves? Yes, sir, Davies confirmed, a renewed sense of purpose in his voice. New tactical schools are emphasizing aggressive pursuit, coordinated attacks. We're developing hunter-killer groups, small, dedicated forces comprising an escort carrier and several destroyer escorts, specifically designed to seek out and destroy U-boat wolf packs rather than simply defending convoys. The idea is to take the fight to them, to make the hunter the hunted. Horton nodded slowly, a thin smile touching his lips. It was a gamble, a desperate all-in play against a formidable enemy. But the tide, he felt, was beginning to turn. The U-boats had enjoyed their happy time. Now, the Atlantic was about to become a very different, far more dangerous place for them. The contempt they held for the Allied escorts, the tin cans, was about to become their undoing. The whispers of these new threats were growing louder, carrying on the frigid Atlantic winds, heralding a reckoning. Section 3. The birth of the hunter-killers. Horton nodded slowly, a thin smile touching his lips. It was a gamble, a desperate all-in play against a formidable enemy. But the tide, he felt, was beginning to turn. The U-boats had enjoyed their happy time. Now, the Atlantic was about to become a very different, far more dangerous place for them. The contempt they held for the Allied escorts, the tin cans, was about to become their undoing. The whispers of these new threats were growing louder, carrying on the frigid Atlantic winds, heralding a reckoning. May 12, 1943. Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia, USA. The sun beat down relentlessly on the immense shipyard, reflecting off the steel hulls of dozens of newly constructed warships. Among them, sleeker and more agile than their larger destroyer cousins, were the destroyer escorts, the DEs. USS Bogue CVE-9, a brand-new escort carrier, sat proudly at her berth. Her flight deck, a hive of activity as Grumman Avenger torpedo bombers and Wildcat fighters were lashed down. On a nearby pier, Lieutenant Commander Daniel V Gallery, a man with a reputation for unconventional thinking and a steely gaze, surveyed his new command. His task group, 21.12, soon to be known informally as a hunter-killer group, was taking shape. Gallery watched as sailors, many of them barely out of their teens, hustled across the gangways of the 3 destroyer escorts assigned to him: USS Clemson, DE-17, USS Roper, DE-18, and USS Osmond Ingram, DE-20. These ships were the epitome of the Allied response to the U-boat menace. Smaller, cheaper, and quicker to build than full-fledged destroyers. They were packed with the latest anti-submarine technology. Their sonar domes were more sensitive, their depth charge racks redesigned for faster deployment, and crucially, each carried the new Mk-10 Hedgehog spigot mortar. Its menacing array of 24 anti-submarine projectiles pointing forward, a silent promise of destruction. "They look like greyhounds, don't they, sir?" A young ensign remarked, coming alongside Gallery. "Greyhounds indeed," Ensign Gallery replied, his eyes still sweeping over the vessels. "But greyhounds that can bite like a shark." He knew the skepticism that still permeated some corners of the Navy. Many traditionalists viewed these smaller escorts with disdain, seeing them as inadequate compared to the battle-hardened destroyers. But Gallery saw their potential, a focused, lethal tool designed for one purpose: to hunt U-boats to extinction. His plan, refined over countless hours of tactical plotting, was simple yet revolutionary. Instead of merely protecting convoys, his group would seek out the U-boats. The Bogue's aircraft would act as airborne eyes and ears, ranging far and wide, spotting surfaced U-boats and directing the destroyer escorts to their prey. Once contact was made, the DEs would launch a relentless, coordinated attack, using their superior sonar and the terrifying precision of the Hedgehog to deny the U-boat any escape. The days of simply waiting for a U-boat to strike a convoy were over. The game was about to change. Gallery walked over to a stack of crates being loaded onto Clemson. They contained the newly developed Foxer-towed acoustic decoy, a device designed to emit sounds that mimicked the propeller noise of a convoy, drawing away torpedoes and confusing U-boat sonar. Every piece of equipment, every new tactic, was a testament to the desperate ingenuity of the Allied war effort. These were not the grand battleships or aircraft carriers that captured headlines. These were the workhorses, the tireless guardians, built for a brutal, unseen war beneath the waves. He thought of the German U-boat captains, still reveling in their happy time, confident in their ability to slip away after a kill. They wouldn't know what hit them. They wouldn't understand the relentless, coordinated assault that would erupt from above and below the waves. The tin cans they had so derisively mocked were no longer just escorts. They were becoming something far more dangerous. They were becoming predators. The Battle of the Atlantic was entering a new, brutal chapter, and Daniel Gallery was ready to write its first bloody pages. Section 4. The First Blood, a new era of hunting begins, gives he thought of the German U-boat captains, still reveling in their happy time, confident in their ability to slip away after a kill. They wouldn't know what hit them. They wouldn't understand the relentless, coordinated assault that would erupt from above and below the waves. The tin cans they had so derisively mocked were no longer just escorts. They were becoming something far more dangerous. They were becoming predators. The Battle of the Atlantic was entering a new, brutal chapter, and Daniel Gallery was ready to write its first bloody pages. June 1st, 1943. Mid-Atlantic, roughly 500 miles southwest of the Azores. The vast expanse of the ocean shimmered under a pale, indifferent sun. High above, a lone Grumman Avenger from USS Bogue's air group patrolled, its radar sweeping the choppy surface. Lieutenant Junior Grade William Billy Hurst, the pilot, peered through his cockpit glass. The rhythmic hum of the engine, a constant companion. For hours, nothing. Just the endless rolling waves. Then, a sudden, jarring ping on his radar scope. It's a faint, fleeting contact. Radar contact. Hurst barked into his intercom, bearing 270, range 10 miles. Looks like a tiny blip. Could be a whale. Or a U-boat. His co-pilot, Ensign Charlie Davies, leaned forward, straining his eyes. Altitude, sir. Looks like it's just surfaced. Lucky break. Hurst immediately banked the Avenger, pushing the powerful aircraft into a shallow dive, eyes glued to the coordinates. Below, the ocean remained deceptively calm, but Hurst knew better. Somewhere down there, a steel predator was breathing fresh air, charging its batteries, utterly unaware that its days of easy hunting were drawing to a swift, brutal close. The training, the endless drills, the grim briefings about sunken convoys, it all sharpened his focus. This wasn't just a patrol, this was a hunt. Moments later, a dark cigar-shaped shadow broke the surface, riding the swells. A German-type VIIC U-boat, U-217, her conning tower stark against the horizon. On her bridge, Kapitan Lieutenant Otto von Bülow, a veteran of several successful patrols, was enjoying a rare moment of fresh air, scanning the skies with an experienced eye. He saw nothing. The vastness of the Atlantic still offered a sense of security, a belief in his own invisibility. That belief shattered a heartbeat later. Aircraft, aircraft. Frantic cry from the lookout. Von Bülow spun around just as Hurst's Avenger, a dark, menacing shape, roared out of the sun. There was no time. The U-boat crew scrambled, a desperate rush to dive, but it was too late. Hurst, flying low and fast, unleashed his depth charges. Twin plumes of water erupted alongside U-217, rocking the submarine violently. The Avenger peeled away. But its mission wasn't to sink the U-boat itself. It was to find it, fix it, and call in the true hunters. Contact. I have a U-boat bearing 275. She's diving. Repeat, diving. Hurst radioed, his voice tight with adrenaline, directly to USS Clemson of Gallery's hunter-killer group. Miles away, aboard Clemson, Lieutenant Commander Andrew Andy Jones, her commanding officer, heard the call. He was already directing his destroyer escort at flank speed towards the reported position. Below decks, the sonar room became a hive of intense concentration. The distinctive pinging of the active sonar began, cutting through the water, searching for the submerged menace. This was it. This was what they had trained for. The era of passive defense was over. The hunt had begun. Sonar contact, sir. Faint, but there. Bearing 030, range 2,000 yards. Jones nodded, a grim determination setting on his face. All ahead full. Prepare Hedgehog for firing. Tell Roper and Osmond Ingram to form up behind us, ready for coordinated attack. The Clemson sliced through the waves, a greyhound unleashed. Below, in the silent, trembling steel of U-217, Von Bülow heard the terrifying, insistent ping of active sonar, growing louder, closer. He had mocked these tin cans for their clumsiness, their inability to find him. But this ping, this relentless, growing presence, felt different. It felt personal. A new kind of hunter was in the water, and he was squarely in its sights. The comfortable arrogance of the wolf pack was about to be put to the ultimate test. Section 5. The Dance of Death, Hedgehog's debut previous section text gives sonar contact. Sir, faint, but there. Bearing 030 range, 2,000 yards. Jones nodded, a grim determination setting on his face. All ahead, full. Prepare Hedgehog for firing. Tell Roper and Osmond Ingram to form up behind us, ready for a coordinated attack. The Clemson sliced through the waves, a greyhound unleashed. Below, in the silent, trembling steel of U-217, Von Bülow heard the terrifying, insistent ping of active sonar, growing louder, closer. He had mocked these tin cans for their clumsiness, their inability to find him. But this ping, this relentless, growing presence, felt different. It felt personal. A new kind of hunter was in the water, and he was squarely in its sights. The comfortable arrogance of the wolf pack was about to be put to the ultimate test. June 1, 1943. 1,000 yards ahead of USS Clemson, 400 feet below the churning waves of the mid-Atlantic. Kapitän-Leutnant Otto von Bülow felt the familiar shudder of U-217 as the distant destroyer raced towards them. He was a hunter by instinct, a predator by trade. But now, the roles were reversed. He was the prey, trapped in the cold, crushing embrace of the deep. The incessant ping-ping-ping of the Allied sonar, a dreadful heartbeat in the darkness. He ordered evasive maneuvers, sharp turns, changes in depth, anything to break the relentless sonar lock. But it was no use. This tin can, this insignificant little escort, was holding its contact with chilling precision. "They're not losing us, Herr Kalian." The hydrophone operator cried, his voice laced with fear. The pings are getting stronger, bearing, closing rapidly. Von Bülow gripped the periscope handles, his knuckles white. He could feel the growing pressure, the increasing tension among his crew. This wasn't the clumsy, imprecise sonar of earlier encounters. This was different. He tried to outmaneuver it, to slip away into the thermal layers, to use the ocean's own acoustics against his pursuer. But the Clemson seemed to anticipate his every move, a shadow dancing with its prey. Above, on the bridge of USS Clemson, Lieutenant Commander Jones watched the sonar screen, a cold focus in his eyes. The U-boat was deep, attempting to evade, but the new, highly sensitive sonar array was holding fast. Range 1,000 yards, 800, 500. The sonarman called out, his voice a steady rhythm. This was the moment. The traditional depth charge attack would mean racing over the U-boat's position, momentarily losing sonar contact, and then dropping charges in the hope of a lucky hit. But not today. Today, they had the Hedgehog. "Prepare to fire, Hedgehog," Jones commanded, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "Target course 030. Maintain speed." The crew on the Hedgehog platform braced themselves. The 24 projectiles, each a blunt, heavy cylinder of steel and high explosive, sat poised in their spigot mortars, aimed forward. This was the first time many of these young sailors would see it fired in anger. This weapon, designed to detonate only on contact, promised to kill, not just to scare. It was a brutal, precise instrument of war. Range 200 yards, bearing steady. "Fire!" Jones roared. A deafening volley erupted from the Clemson's bow. Not a roar, but a series of sharp, violent thuds as the compressed air launched the Hedgehog projectiles in a wide, circular pattern ahead of the destroyer Escort. The projectiles arced through the air for a brief, terrifying moment before plunging into the waves with a multitude of splashes, racing towards the submerged U-boat like a swarm of metallic bees. Below, in U-217, von Bülow heard a new, terrifying sound. A series of faint whistling noises approaching rapidly through the water. He knew what it was. He had read the intelligence reports, dismissed them as Allied propaganda, another desperate measure. But now, the impossible was happening. This tin can was firing forward. Then, the ocean itself seemed to explode. Not one single concussive blast, but a rapid, shattering succession of sharp, metallic crunches and booms. Crunch, crunch, a boom, crunch. Water poured in through ruptured seams, lights flickered and died, and the steel hull groaned under unimaginable stress. Men screamed. The U-boat pitched violently, then began to list an uncontrollable, sickening lurch into the abyss. Von Bülow was thrown against a bulkhead, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. Disbelief, cold and absolute, washed over him. The mockery, the arrogance. It had all been a lie. These tin cans were no longer fumbling, blind escorts. They were deadly, they were precise, and they had found their mark. The Hedgehog had claimed its first victim of this new, brutal hunt. The dance of death had begun, and the U-boat was losing. Section 6. The unraveling of the wolf pack gives von Bülow was thrown against a bulkhead, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. Disbelief, cold and absolute, washed over him. The mockery, the arrogance, it had all been a lie. These tin cans were no longer fumbling, blind escorts. They were deadly. They were precise. And they had found their mark. The Hedgehog had claimed its first victim of this new, brutal hunt. The dance of death had begun, and the U-boat was losing. June 1st, 1943. Minutes after the explosions, surface of the mid-Atlantic. On the bridge of USS Clemson, a stunned silence fell, quickly replaced by a wave of triumphant cheers. The sonar operator, his face pale with adrenaline, confirmed the impossible. "Multiple detonations, sir. Contact lost. No sign of propulsion." Breaking up noises, Lieutenant Commander Jones allowed himself a grim, satisfied nod. There was no doubt. U-217 was gone. The ocean, which moments before had been calm, now roiled with the macabre evidence of death. An expanding slick of oil, debris slowly rising to the surface. It was a stark, brutal victory. A clear demonstration of the hunter-killer group's devastating potential and the Hedgehog's terrifying efficacy. News of the sinking of U-217 rippled through the Allied command. It was not just one U-boat, but a symbolic turning point. Admiral Horton in Liverpool received the report with quiet satisfaction. He knew this was just the beginning. The tin cans were finally biting back, and their teeth were sharper than any U-boat captain had imagined. Meanwhile, in the depths of the Atlantic, far from the scene of U-217's demise, the remaining German wolf packs continued their patrols, still largely confident in their methods. But subtle changes were already occurring. Pilots from Bogue's Air Group and other escort carriers joining the fray were becoming relentlessly effective. Their new centimetric radar, undetectable by the U-boat's METOX receiver, allowed them to spot surfaced submarines from miles away, often at night, denying the U-boats their crucial respite on the surface to recharge batteries and ventilate. Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Schroeder, commanding U-66, a seasoned veteran currently stalking a convoy off the coast of Brazil, felt a growing unease. His METOX receiver, usually a reliable alarm, had been eerily silent, even as reports of aerial attacks on other U-boats filtered through. It was as if the British and Americans were developing an invisible eye in the sky. "Anything, Herr Kalian?" his radio operator asked, his voice strained. The last guesstimate from Grupp Dunitz said U-217 was operating in this sector. Now silence. Schroeder frowned, peering through the periscope. The convoy ahead was still there, but now a small escort carrier, probably one of those CVEs, was circling a few miles distant, its deck bristling with aircraft. And flanking the convoy were more of those small, fast destroyer escorts, the Americans called them. They moved with a new agility, a predatory grace that Schroeder hadn't seen before. They weren't just defending, they seemed to be searching. That night, as U-66 surfaced to recharge, the tranquil darkness was suddenly rent by the roar of an aircraft engine. Before the crew could even scramble to man the anti-aircraft gun, depth charges straddled the U-boat, sending a bone-jarring shockwave through the hull. Schroeder, soaked and shaken on the conning tower, ordered an emergency dive, his heart hammering. He hadn't seen the plane. His METOX hadn't warned him. As U-66 plunged into the depths, Schroeder understood. The arrogance, the casual dismissal of Allied technology was costing them dearly. The tin cans and their aerial partners were no longer a laughing matter. They were an existential threat. The Wolfpack, once the undisputed apex predator of the Atlantic, was beginning to unravel, piece by painful piece, under the relentless, coordinated assault of a new generation of hunters. The balance of power was shifting inexorably towards the Allies. Section 7. Black May the Tides Turn gives as U-66 plunged into the depths. Schroeder understood. The arrogance, the casual dismissal of Allied technology was costing them dearly. The tin cans and their aerial partners were no longer a laughing matter. They were an existential threat. The Wolfpack, once the undisputed apex predator of the Atlantic, was beginning to unravel, piece by painful piece, under the relentless, coordinated assault of a new generation of hunters. The balance of power was shifting inexorably towards the Allies. May 1943. Naval Staff Headquarters, Western Approaches, Liverpool, and U-Boat Command Headquarters, Courneuvel, Lorient, France. The shift was palpable, a chilling reversal of fortunes. For the Allied command, the atmosphere in the war room, once heavy with dread, now buzzed with a cautious, exhilarating hope. The red pins on the map, once symbols of Allied losses, were now being joined by an increasing number of blue pins, each representing a sunken U-boat. In May 1943 alone, an astonishing 43 German U-boats were sunk, a staggering blow that sent shockwaves through the German Kriegsmarine. The month became known as Black May among the U-boat crews. Admiral Sir Max Horton, his face less grim, studied the map with fierce satisfaction. The hunter-killer groups, spearheaded by carriers like USS Bogue and their accompanying destroyer escorts, were proving devastatingly effective. The coordinated air and sea attacks, the precision of Hedgehog, the invisibility of centimetric radar, it had all coalesced into a nearly unbreakable net. They're no longer just defending. Gentlemen, Horton announced to his staff, his voice firm. They are actively seeking, actively destroying. We are no longer simply containing the threat. We are eradicating it. Meanwhile, across the channel, in the cold, concrete bunker of U-Boat Command, Admiral Karl Dunitz stared at his own map, his face etched with growing despair. The reports coming in were horrific. Boats were being lost at an unsustainable rate. Veteran captains, men he considered his best, were vanishing without a trace. The morale of his crews, once unshakable, was beginning to crack under the relentless pressure. Another one, Herr Admiral, his chief of staff, reported, his voice flat. U-640. Lost contact after reporting an aircraft sighting. Dunitz slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing through the bunker. How are they finding us with such impunity? My Matok's receivers are silent. They have no warning. He knew that technical experts were scrambling, trying to understand the Allied radar advancements. But the solutions were not coming fast enough. Every day, more boats, more men were being sacrificed in what was rapidly becoming a one-sided slaughter. He recalled the early days, the triumph of the wolf packs, the easy victories. The Allied escorts had seemed so primitive, so helpless against his submarines. They had mocked those tin cans, those small fry. Now, those same small fry, armed with new eyes and new teeth, were tearing his fleet apart. The arrogance, the underestimation of the enemy's ingenuity was proving to be a fatal flaw. The reports detailed the terrifying effectiveness of the American destroyer escorts. Their relentless sonar, their ability to fire ahead with the Hedgehog, meant there was often no escape. Once caught, a U-boat was relentlessly hunted until destroyed. The Atlantic, once their hunting ground, was becoming a grave. Dunitz, a proud and determined commander, was forced to confront the impossible. He ordered a temporary withdrawal of his U-boats from the most dangerous areas of the North Atlantic. It was a bitter pill to swallow, an admission of defeat in a battle he had once believed he was winning. The tides had irrevocably turned. Black May marked the end of the U-boat's dominance and the beginning of the end for the German surface and submarine war in the Atlantic. The mockery had ceased, replaced by a grim realization of their vulnerability. The hunters had become the hunted. Section 8. The relentless grind, a war of attrition, gives Dunitz. A proud and determined commander was forced to confront the impossible. He ordered a temporary withdrawal of his U-boats from the most dangerous areas of the North Atlantic. It was a bitter pill to swallow, an admission of defeat in a battle he had once believed he was winning. The tides had irrevocably turned. Black May marked the end of the U-boat's dominance and the beginning of the end for the German surface and submarine war in the Atlantic. The mockery had ceased, replaced by a grim realization of their vulnerability. The hunters had become the hunted. August 20th, 1943. Naval Operating Base, Argentia, Newfoundland. The raw, biting wind of the North Atlantic whipped across the docks, carrying the scent of salt and fuel. Lieutenant Commander Daniel V. Gallery, now a seasoned veteran of the hunter-killer campaign, stood on the quarterdeck of USS Bogue, watching his destroyer escorts being refueled and resupplied. The initial elation of Black May had settled into a grim, relentless grind. The U-boats were still out there, albeit fewer of them, and their crews were becoming even more desperate and cunning. The war had evolved beyond a battle of specific technologies. It was now a war of attrition, of endurance, and of psychological warfare. Gallery knew that every sunken U-boat meant not just fewer ships lost, but also a dent in the enemy's will to fight. The U-boat command, under Dunitz, was pushing hard, developing new acoustic torpedoes, the G7E's Zongkönig, or GNAT, designed to home in on the sound of an escort's propellers. It was a dangerous counter, forcing the Allies to develop countermeasures like the Foxer acoustic decoy. "We lost U-122 a GNAT last week, sir," reported Lieutenant Thomas "Tom" Hayes, the Bogue's executive officer, his face weary. "The new torpedoes are a serious threat. We're getting good results with the Foxer, but it's a constant race to stay ahead." Gallery nodded, his gaze distant. The fight was never truly over. The German U-boat crews, even in the face of impossible odds, continued to sort, driven by duty, patriotism, and fear of retribution. They were testing new strategies, trying to avoid the air patrols by traveling almost exclusively submerged, or operating in areas where air cover was sparse. But the hunter-killer groups were adapting just as fast. The training had become even more intense. Coordinated attacks involving multiple destroyer escorts, weaving intricate sonar patterns to trap submerged U-boats, were now standard procedure. The depth charges, once dropped almost blindly, were now precisely aimed, often guided by multiple sonar contacts from converging escorts. The Hedgehog, with its devastating accuracy, remained a primary weapon, its contact explosions a terrifying signature of a kill. The camaraderie among the crews of the destroyer escorts and the Bogue's airmen was fierce, forged in the crucible of shared danger and mutual reliance. They were the tip of the spear in the Battle of the Atlantic, the men who had turned the tide. They spoke of the U-boats not with mockery, but with a grudging respect for their resilience, mixed with a burning determination to send every last one to the bottom. Gallery walked along the deck, feeling the vibration of the ship, the steady rhythm of a force dedicated to its mission. He thought of the early days of the war, when the U-boat menace had seemed insurmountable, when the tin cans were indeed considered fodder. Now, these very ships, purpose-built and crewed by dedicated, well-trained sailors, were systematically dismantling the German submarine fleet. They were the unglamorous heroes, the tireless hunters who had mastered the dark, unseen war beneath the waves. The victory was not glamorous, but it was essential. Won through a relentless grind of innovation, courage, and sheer, unwavering persistence. Section 9. The legacy of the hunter-killers gives Gallery walked along the deck, feeling the vibration of the ship, the steady rhythm of a force dedicated to its mission. He thought of the early days of the war, when the U-boat menace had seemed insurmountable, when the tin cans were indeed considered fodder. Now, these very ships, purpose-built and crewed by dedicated, well-trained sailors, were systematically dismantling the German submarine fleet. They were the unglamorous heroes, the tireless hunters who had mastered the dark, unseen war beneath the waves. The victory was not glamorous, but it was essential. Won through a relentless grind of innovation, courage, and sheer, unwavering persistence. May 8, 1945. The North Atlantic. The surrender of Germany had been signed, and a profound, almost disorienting silence fell across the vast, once deadly expanse of the Atlantic. For the first time in years, Allied convoys sailed unmolested, their escorts no longer scanning for the telltale signs of a submerged predator. For the crews of the destroyer escorts and the aircraft of the escort carriers, the relentless tension that had been their constant companion for years finally lifted. Yet, the ocean held its secrets, its memories, and the echoes of countless desperate battles. On the bridge of USS Bogue, now heading home after years of relentless patrolling, Captain Daniel V. Gallery, promoted, and weary but undeniably triumphant, looked out at the tranquil sea. The legacy of his hunter-killer group and all the others that followed its groundbreaking example was etched into the very fabric of the Allied victory. They had not just defended convoys, they had actively broken the back of the German U-boat arm, ensuring that the vital lifeline between America and Britain remained open. The statistics spoke for themselves. Of the 1,162 U-boats built by Germany during World War II, 783 were sunk. The vast majority of these kills, especially in the crucial turning point of 1943 onwards, were attributed to the combined efforts of escort carriers, their aircraft, and the diligent, tenacious destroyer escorts. These tin cans, once mocked, had collectively sunk a disproportionate number of U-boats, demonstrating that specialized anti-submarine warfare, executed with innovative tactics and technology, was the definitive answer to the U-boat menace. Gallery thought of the young men who had served under him, many of whom had seen friends disappear beneath the waves, or had witnessed the brutal aftermath of a U-boat kill. They were the unsung heroes of the Battle of the Atlantic, the men who had turned the hunter into the hunted. Their courage, their adaptability, and their relentless pursuit had transformed the face of naval warfare. The U-boat captains, once confident in their technological superiority and the vastness of the ocean, had been systematically outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and ultimately destroyed. Their initial mockery of the humble destroyer escort had given way to a terrifying respect, and finally, a desperate, losing fight against an enemy they had so fundamentally underestimated. The Battle of the Atlantic was one of the longest and most brutal campaigns of World War II, fought in the crushing anonymity of the open ocean. It was a battle won not by grand fleet engagements, but by the relentless grind of smaller ships, specialized aircraft, and the innovative minds that armed them. The destroyer escorts, once dismissed, had proven to be the sharpest teeth in the Allied arsenal, turning the tide and securing the Allied path to victory. Their story is a testament to the power of adaptation, the strength of human ingenuity, and the ultimate folly of underestimating a determined enemy. The tin cans had hunted the wolves to oblivion.